Spirit of George.
Long time here, hold on a second. My cousin George had a very strong spirit. He had a great zest for life, and he had a hard time giving it up. And I think that what I felt on January 31st, just a few days before he departed, was his spirit reaching out and saying, I don't want to go. Starting Sunday evening, I started feeling a decline in my own mood. Somewhere around Tuesday-ish, I started wondering what's going on. Is someone in my family sick? And of course, I said George, because I knew George was sick. We had only emailed each other a few days earlier. We email each other because George lives in Kotor, which is where my father and where he was born, Kotor, Montenegro. So our communications are long distance, but I did get to meet him a few times. On Wednesday evening, I felt as if my heart would break. And then I came to the end of a tunnel, and the light was starting to show again. And the spirit wasn't as glum, and I was at peace. And I thought, what happened? I went to bed, ignored it, got up in the morning, and still I was at peace. Picked up the phone to go about my business, and there was a text message: George had passed. And quietly the tears started to flow, and then I thought, I want to think about how he lived. George loved life. That was what I got from him when I first met him, and every time afterwards when I met him. George was 12 years younger than my father, both born in Kotor, Montenegro. And the cousins, the uncles, they all hung out together. And the first story I heard about in Kotor, and think about Kotor, it's an old town. The center of town is called Old Town, all brick buildings and a gigantic gate and a moat. And around it are homes that are all stone. There's lots of stone there, so homes are built of stone. And the gates are built of stone with wooden fences. When the boys would go running around having fun, because it was women's work to cook and clean and do all that stuff, boys go away, grandmother would say, come home at such and such time, or I'm going to lock the door and you're spending the night outside. She was threatening them. They didn't believe her. So the boys are doing what boys do. This is George telling me his story. And they go home only to find the gates locked. Well, George being the smallest, they push George over the fence so he can unlock the door. The grandmother finds George, and guess who gets in trouble? George. After World War II, George was born somewhere around 1927-ish. After World War II, Yugoslavia became a closed country. You needed a visa to get in, you needed a visa to get out, and you needed to have permission from the government to leave for business purposes. If you were a Western sympathizer, you were not getting a visa. You were stuck inside Yugoslavia. George, in his mid-20s, wanted to go see the world. So he talked to another relative, an uncle of ours, who was a military sea captain, who vouched for George's character. He would be a good soldier for a Navyman for our ships. So George joined the Navy. And the ship made a tour of duty to New York. And imagine this 20-something from a poor little country coming, just floating into shore, and you see the Statue of Liberty, you see New York City, you get shore leave. What a fantastic place. George didn't get back on the ship again. He went AWOL. And I think that's probably the main reason he was the black sheep of the family. My uncle had a hard time afterwards. Almost went to prison because of what George did. But George, everybody survived. And George found his way from New York to California, where we had more relatives. In California, he got himself a job, worked for Safeway. George loved people. Safeway was perfect. He was a cashier. He talked to everybody. He knew everybody in the neighborhood. He would tell me about this young Leon Panetta, who was such a nice Italian boy. He would run errands for his mother. And as a cashier, he met a lovely woman who was an anesthesiologist and married her. And he had a wonderful life in California. And yet, by the late 1970s, he started feeling homesick for the beautiful coast of Yugoslavia and found his way back to Dubrovnik, where he became a tour guide. Just the most perfect type of job for someone who gets revitalized by being around people. He was very good at English, so he was a great English tour guide. He was good at Italian. He was good at German. He was having so much fun working as a tour guide. About middle of 1980s, my father decided that I should visit the family for the first time after over 20 years. That would be the first time I met George. My father miscommunicated when we would arrive, and our host family, one of my cousins, did not pick us up at the airport and wasn't even home when we got to her house. Now remember, stone houses with a fence and a gate that's locked. We arrive, and there's this big old gate, this tall. I mean, they're big fences. And my dad and I are standing there, luggage in hand, sun's starting to beam because it's almost midday of end of May. It gets pretty warm there. And along comes George, unbelievably. Hey, what are you doing standing out here? Go in, go in. And my father says, it's locked, you idiot. Basically telling his nephew, doofus. Oh, no problem, says George. And yet again, he climbs over the fence and unlocks the door. And as luck would have it, that's when our host arrived. And of course, there's yuck, yuck, yuck at you breaking into my house. And we all went in and had tea and cake. George just had a zest for life. Sadly, it was another 20 years before I saw George again. This time he had retired from Dubrovnik, and he had moved into Stari Grad Kotor, which is the old city. Inside the gates, he had this amazing little apartment on the 4th level, no elevators, mind you, on the 4th level, overlooking the main piazza as you walk into the main gate of the old village, of the old town. On the base, you have 4 little cafe shops. He says, my place is small, but I have a gigantic living room. He was calling the coffee shop his living room. He would go down, have coffee, read papers, say hello to everybody, and go up. Maybe come back down again after lunch, maybe come back down again after dinner. He just had a wonderful life. He became integrated with the Kotor historical community. The second time I came to Kotor when he was there, he was being interviewed for his historical knowledge of the city. Over the years, he continued to decline, as we all unfortunately do. He started to lose his hearing, which is a terrible thing for someone who loves people. And his physical health made it difficult for him to ascend and mostly ascend the stairs, but descending wasn't all that easy. But he was smart. On every level, he put a chair. So as he would either go down or go up, he would sit on the chair and rest so that he could go meet his friends every day and get revitalized by being around people. What I learned from George was not to be afraid to grab onto enjoying life. It's short, enjoy it. And it was the strength of his love of life that I'm going to try and remember. And George was a really great cousin. Thank you.